The house smelled like coffee that nobody had made. Renatus Holloway. Wait, that name is in the file. Let me proceed directly. The house smelled like coffee that nobody had made. Isabel stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment, staring at the empty carafe, the unwashed mug from the night before still sitting in the sink. The dishwasher was full of clean dishes. She had run it yesterday morning, before the appointment, before everything. She hadn't unloaded it. She kept meaning to. She was always meaning to. The chair where Gavin used to read the paper on Sunday mornings sat slightly angled toward the window, the way he always left it, pointed at the backyard where the maple had started to turn. October in Oakville did that. Stripped things back, made everything honest. The leaves couldn't pretend anymore. Neither could she. Her phone was on the counter. 6:14 a.m. She had not slept past 5:30 in 11 days. She picked up the phone. There was a message from her sister, sent at midnight. Call me when you can. No rush. Love you. There was nothing from Gavin. There was never anything from Gavin anymore. Not since she'd stopped being the kind of wife who waited. 3 years earlier, Isabel Crane had been the kind of woman other women described as having it together. She was 38, worked as a senior project manager at a mid-size architecture firm on King Street West, and had a husband who made partner at his accounting firm the same spring they bought the house in Oakville. They had a daughter, Rosie, who was 6 and obsessed with horses and the color orange. They had a life that looked, from the outside, exactly the way a life is supposed to look. She knew this because people told her. At Rosie's school pickup, at dinner parties, at her mother-in-law's Christmas gathering where someone always cornered her to say, "You two are just the perfect couple," honestly. She had smiled every time. She had believed it, mostly. She had wanted to. Gavin Mercer was handsome in the way that accountants sometimes are, neat, reliable, with a kind of quiet competence that people trusted on instinct. He was good at his job. He was good with Rosie. He was not. Isabel had learned slowly, and then all at once, good at being honest. The first sign she wasn't the type to snoop, and she'd told herself that from the beginning she wasn't going to be that woman, paranoid and checking timestamps. But it was the way he held it now. Angled down. Screen dimmed to its lowest setting. Taken into the bathroom at 10 o'clock at night with an offhand. Just checking something for work. Said to no one in particular because Isabel was reading, and Rosie was asleep, and there was no one in the house who needed convincing except, maybe, himself. She noticed. She didn't say anything. Not yet. The second sign was the travel. Gavin had always traveled for work. Client meetings in Calgary, conferences in Ottawa, that kind of thing. Maybe 4 or 5 times a year. But in the spring of their 3rd year in the Oakville house, it became 6 trips, then 8. Always a few days at a time. Always legitimate sounding reasons. And he came back from each one somehow further away than when he'd left, the way a tide goes out and takes a little more sand each time. She told herself she was being anxious. She told herself she was tired. Rosie had started grade 1, and the adjustment had been harder than anyone warned her. All the crying at drop-off, the bad dreams, the endless sniffles. Isabel was carrying the weight of their household the way she always had, quietly, competently, without making it a thing. And she told herself that's why things felt off. Because she was depleted, because they needed a vacation, because marriage goes through seasons, her mother always said, and you don't give up on a garden just because it's November. She held on to that. She held on to it for 8 more months. The moment she stopped holding on had nothing dramatic about it. She was in the kitchen on a Tuesday in February, making Rosie's lunch, and her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She was running late, and the crust needed to come off the sandwich, and Rosie was shouting something about her library book. But she answered anyway. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Calm, careful. The kind of calm that comes after someone has rehearsed what they're going to say, isn't sure they'll get through it. Yes. A pause. Then, I think we need to talk. About your husband. Her name was Diana Chibi. She was 32. She worked in the Toronto office of the same national firm, where Gavin had recently been promoted to lead a cross-regional file. A file that required, apparently, a great deal of coordination with the Vancouver team. A team Diane was part of. A team that Gavin had been flying to see not 4 or 5 times, but every 3 weeks since June. Diane had not called to be cruel. Isabel understood that within the first 2 minutes. The woman was shaking. She could hear it under the steadiness, the way a building vibrates even when it looks still. She had found out, she said, that Gavin was married only last week. Only when a colleague mentioned the Oakville house, the daughter, the wife. She had not known. She wanted Isabel to know that she had not known. After she hung up, Isabel stood in the kitchen for a very long time. Rosie was still shouting about the library book. Isabel cut the crusts off the sandwich. She put it in the bag. She drove Rosie to school. She kissed her at the door and told her to have a good day, and watched her run down the hallway toward her classroom. Then she sat in the car in the school parking lot on a Tuesday morning in February and understood, with the absolute clarity of someone who has just received information that rearranges everything, that her life as she had known it was over. She didn't cry. Not then. She made a phone call. Her friend Wendy Osborne had been through a divorce 4 years earlier and had come out the other side of it with the kind of hard-won practicality that Isabel had watched from a distance and quietly hoped she would never need. Wendy was the person who, when Isabel called from the parking lot and said only, "He's been cheating," did not say, "Are you sure?" or "Oh my God," or "What are you going to do?" She said, "Okay, don't tell him you know yet. Call Marcus Yee." Marcus Yee was a family lawyer in Mississauga whom Wendy had used and trusted. Isabel called him that afternoon, from her office, with the door closed, and her voice lower than she'd ever spoken in a professional setting. She told him everything she knew. The phone calls to Vancouver, Diane Achebe, the timeline, the conference trips that were not just conferences. Marcus listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Before you confront your husband, I want you to understand what you're entitled to and what you're likely walking into. The house, the accounts, his pension, all of that becomes relevant the moment you separate. How long you wait and how prepared you are will matter." She asked him how long she should wait. He said, "Long enough to understand the full picture. Not so long that you lose yourself in it." That was the most useful thing anyone said to her for the next 6 weeks. She did not tell Gavin she knew. She went home that night and made dinner and helped Rosie with her reading homework and sat on the couch while he told her about his day, a day she now understood had been constructed, at least in part, around a lie that had been running for 8 months. She watched his face while he talked. He was a good liar, comfortable. She had always thought he was an honest man. She had been wrong in a way that made her feel both furious and foolish, and she sat with both feelings and let them sharpen her instead of breaking her. Over the next 3 weeks, she quietly gathered what Marcus had asked for: copies of joint account statements, the mortgage documents, the investment portfolio summary that Gavin kept in a folder in the filing cabinet in his office, to which she had always had access because he had never thought to hide it. She photographed each page with her phone. She emailed them to herself. She was calm about all of it, the way you are calm when you are operating from a decision that has already been made and cannot be unmade. She also called the HR department at Gavin's firm. Not to report him, not yet. But she knew, because Wendy had told her, because Marcus had confirmed it, that if Gavin's relationship with Diane Achebe was a workplace affair, which it appeared to be, there were policies involved, potential professional consequences, and a paper trail that might become relevant. She wasn't going to set anything in motion. She was just going to understand the landscape. She understood the landscape. Gavin announced, on a Thursday in March, that he needed to fly to Vancouver again. Weekend trip. Client presentation on Monday, wanted to be there early to prepare. He had told this particular lie so many times that he delivered it with the ease of someone reciting a phone number they've known for years. He was already on his laptop booking the flight before he finished explaining it to her. Isabel said, "Of course, I'll manage with Rosie." She always managed with Rosie. She called Marcus the next morning and told him she was ready. He asked her one question: "Are you sure you want to do it this way? Or do you want to wait until he's back and have the conversation in person?" She thought about it for a moment. She thought about the parking lot in February. She thought about 8 months. She thought about the way he'd said, "I'll manage with Rosie," and then changed it, at the last second, to "You'll manage with Rosie," with the ease of someone who had already stopped counting. "I want to do it this way," she said. What she did was not dramatic. She did not empty the bank accounts, or throw his clothes into the driveway, or call his mother. She had thought about all of those things at various points in the last 6 weeks, and she had set them all aside because she understood. Because Marcus had made her understand that the most powerful thing she could do was to be methodical. She called Wendy on Friday night, after Rosie was asleep, and she told her everything. Wendy drove over with wine and did not drink any of it, and sat at the kitchen table while Isabel talked, and she did not say "I told you so," which Isabel had been half afraid of, because Wendy had always had a quiet unease about Gavin that she had never fully articulated. "What's the plan?" Wendy asked. "Marcus is filing Monday. Gavin will be served when he lands back in Toronto." Wendy looked at her for a long moment. "And Rosie?" "Rosie stays with me. Marcus says the arrangement, given his travel pattern and the fact that I've been the primary caregiver, will likely reflect that. But it'll take time. Are you okay?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm not okay," she said. "But I'm not lost either. I know exactly where I'm standing." That was the truest thing she said to anyone for a long time. Gavin came home on Sunday night. She was reading in the living room when he came through the door. He set down his bag. He said he was tired from the flight. He went to the kitchen and got himself a glass of water and stood at the counter scrolling through his phone, and she watched him from the couch. This man she had built a life with, this man she had thought she knew, and she felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, exactly, but resolution. Like a joint that has been out of place for months finally sitting back where it belongs. She did not say anything to him that night. She made him coffee in the morning. She got Rosie ready for school. She drove their daughter to school and kissed her at the door and told her to have a good day. Then she drove to Marcus Yee's office and sat in the chair across from his desk and signed the papers. The process server reached Gavin at his office at 11:43 a.m. Wendy texted her at noon. "You doing okay?" She texted back, "Yes." She was at her desk. She had a project deadline. She worked until 5:30, same as always. She picked up Rosie from after-school care and took her to the place on lecture that she liked. And Rosie ate her entire bowl of noodles and told her about a girl at school who could do a cartwheel with her eyes closed, and Isabel listened to every word. What came next was not easy. She would not pretend it was. Gavin did not take it quietly. He was angry in the way men are angry when they are caught. Not remorseful, not humble, but affronted. As though her discovery of his betrayal was itself a kind of betrayal, an intrusion into something she was not supposed to have found. He hired his own lawyer, a man named Preston Aldridge, who Isabel had met twice at firm Christmas parties, and remembered as someone who laughed too loudly at his own jokes. He argued, through Preston, that her claim on the investment portfolio was overstated. He argued that his travel had been work-related, that the nature of his relationship with Diane Ashby was being mischaracterized, that Isabel was pursuing a settlement that was disproportionate to the circumstances. Marcus was not impressed by any of this. "He's posturing," he told her, in his office in Mississauga, on a gray Wednesday morning in April. "The financial disclosure requirements are going to be very clear once we get into discovery. He knows that. How long will it take? To reach a settlement? If he cooperates, 6 to 8 months. If he keeps posturing." Marcus paused. "Longer, but I want you to be prepared for something." She waited. "He's going to try to make this about your parenting. Not because he has a case. He doesn't. Your record as Rosie's primary caregiver is documented and consistent. But because he knows it's the thing most likely to destabilize you. It's a tactic. I've seen it many times." She thought of Rosie's school bag hanging on the hook by the door. The way Rosie still reached for her hand at crosswalks, even at 7, even when she was being cool about it and pretending she didn't need to. "He won't destabilize me," she said. She meant it. He tried. In May, through Preston, he requested a formal custody assessment. He argued that his schedule had evolved, that he was prepared to reduce his travel commitments, and that a shared arrangement would be in Rosie's best interests. He filed an affidavit that described, in carefully phrased language, a version of their marriage in which Isabel had been emotionally withdrawn, preoccupied with work, unavailable. She read the affidavit in Marcus's office, and she felt tired. Not defeated, tired. There is a difference. Defeat has a quality of surrender to it. Tiredness is just the acknowledgement that something is taking longer than it should, that you have been carrying something for longer than is reasonable, and your arms are feeling it. She read every word. She handed it back to Marcus. "What do we do?" she asked. He had already prepared the response. Rosie's school records, teacher communications, medical appointment history, school pickup logs. 5 years of documentation that told, in the language of attendance and continuity and presence, exactly who had been there. He had Wendy's statement. He had the after-school care records. He had the pediatrician's notes. He had, in short, everything. Because Isabel had kept everything. Not strategically, not initially, just because she was the kind of person who did. The kind of person who followed up and followed through and kept the records because someone had to. That someone had always been her. The settlement conference was held on a Tuesday in September. Isabel wore the blue blazer she'd had since before Rosie was born. She sat across a table from Gavin and his lawyer, and she did not look at him for longer than was necessary, because she had found, over the past 7 months, that looking at him too long made her feel something she could not afford to feel in a legal proceeding. Not sadness, exactly, but a kind of grief for the version of him she had believed in, for all the Sundays with the newspaper and the coffee and the angled chair by the window. She looked at Marcus instead. He was calm. He had always been calm, and she had come to understand this as a form of information. His calm told her how the ground lay. The ground, that Tuesday, lay well. Gavin's lawyer opened with a revised proposal that was closer to what Marcus had been recommending for 3 months. The investment portfolio. The house for the time being until Rosie finished primary school, at which point it would be sold and split. Primary residence with Isabel, alternating weekends and shared school holidays with Gavin. She did not feel triumphant. She had thought she might when this moment came, that there would be something sharp and satisfying about it, the way she had imagined it in the parking lot in February, that bleak Tuesday morning when her life rearranged itself. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like a door closing, quietly, the way a door closes when you're already in the next room. She signed. The maple in the backyard went fully red by the end of October. Rosie, who was 7 now and had recently learned the word magnificent and was applying it to everything, called it magnificent. She said this while standing at the back door in her socks, not going outside yet, just looking. Isabel stood behind her in the kitchen and looked at the same tree. It was the same tree it had always been. That was the thing about the house. It was the same. The dishwasher still needed unloading. The chair by the window still sat at an angle, though she had straightened it twice. The coffee still needed making every morning. None of the ordinary things had changed, and she had thought, in those first dark weeks, that the weight of that sameness would be unbearable. She had been wrong about that. The sameness was not a burden. It was a floor. It was the thing she stood on while she figured out what came next. What came next was smaller than she had expected and better. She took on a project at work that stretched her in ways she had not been stretched in years. A mixed-use development in Hamilton, complicated and interesting, the kind of thing she had been quietly passing over in the years when household management had consumed most of her remaining bandwidth. She said yes to it. She stayed late twice a week and came home to find Rosie fed and homework adjacent and full of opinions about everything, which was, Isabel had decided, the best possible outcome for a 7-year-old. Wendy started coming over on Sunday mornings. They did not do anything remarkable on these Sundays. They drank coffee and sometimes went for a walk along the lake and talked about ordinary things. Work, Rosie, the news. A documentary one of them had watched. It was not dramatic. It was just company, the reliable kind, the kind that doesn't require explanation. Diana Chibi had sent her a message in the spring, a brief one, apologizing again. Isabel had read it twice and then written back, "Thank you for telling me. I mean that." She did not know if she would hear from her again. She found she had no strong feelings about it either way. Gavin moved into a condo in Etobicoke. He was good with Rosie on the weekends he had her. Rosie did not seem broken by any of it, which was the thing Isabel had been most afraid of, the fear that had sat beneath everything else all year like a cold current. Kids were not, it turned out, as fragile as the fear made them seem. They were sturdy in ways that surprised you if you let them be. Rosie still reached for her hand at crosswalks. On a Saturday in November, Isabel drove out to a stable east of Guelph that a colleague had recommended. It was not something she had planned. She had planned to drive to the hardware store and then maybe walk around the neighborhood and do nothing in particular. But she had found herself on the highway going the wrong direction, and she had kept going. The stable was run by a woman named Harriet Breck, who was 60-something and direct in the way of people who have spent a long time around animals and have no patience left for performance. She showed Isabel around without ceremony. There were 8 horses. 3 of them were available for lessons. "You ride?" Harriet Breck asked. "Not since I was 12, Isabel said. "Then you'll be useless," Harriet said, and then smiled briefly. "Everyone is, at first." Isabel stood at the fence for a long time afterward, watching one of the horses move in a slow circle in the paddock. It was a gray. It moved the way things move when they're not performing for anyone, just moving. She called Rosie on the drive home and told her about the horses. Rosie said that was magnificent. She said it 5 more times before they hung up. She did not know what the next year would look like. She had stopped trying to picture it in the early months. When picturing it made her chest tighten in a way she didn't like, and the habit had stuck. There were things ahead. The Hamilton Project, Rosie's school concert in December, the first Christmas with a different shape, the slow and not always comfortable business of learning to live in a house that was fully hers now, with all the space and all the quiet that came with that. She was not afraid of quiet the way she had expected to be. She was not afraid of the chair by the window, or the maple going bare, or Sunday mornings that were just hers to arrange. She was not afraid of being 38 and starting over, because she had come to understand, somewhere between February and November, between the parking lot and the paddock fence, that starting over was not the catastrophe she had been raised to think it was. It was just the next thing. She unloaded the dishwasher on a Saturday morning in November, while Rosie ate cereal and told her about the cartwheel girl who had now graduated to backflips, allegedly. "Do you believe her?" Isabel asked. Rosie considered this with great seriousness. "I believe in her potential," she said. Isabel set a stack of plates in the cabinet and laughed. "A real one, the kind that comes from somewhere lower than your chest, the kind that you don't have to perform." Outside, the maple was bare now. November had done what it always did, and the yard looked exactly like what it was, a yard in winter, waiting quietly, already growing toward spring.